The night my parents changed the locks on our family home, I stood in the rain with nothing but a duffel bag and $150 to my name. "You'll never amount to anything," my father had shouted as he slammed the door. 10 years later, I sat across from them in the boardroom of my company, watching their expressions as they realized they were pitching their failing business to the daughter they had thrown away. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The acceptance letter from Columbia University arrived on a Tuesday. The prestigious blue and white envelope stood out among the usual bills and advertisements in our mailbox, like a beacon of everything I had worked toward since freshman year. My hands trembled as I carefully opened it, already knowing what it would say. I had been checking the online portal obsessively for days. "Dear Ms. Alexandra Winters, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to Columbia University's School of Engineering and Applied Science for the fall semester." The words blurred through my tears of relief and vindication. 4 years of advanced placement classes, late nights studying while my friends were at parties, and weekends volunteering at the local science center had culminated in this moment. I had earned a partial scholarship that would cover about 60% of the tuition. The rest I would need to finance through student loans and the college fund my grandparents had started for me when I was born. I rushed home from the mailbox, the letter clutched to my chest like a precious artifact. Our modest suburban house in Rochester looked particularly welcoming that afternoon, the spring sunlight warming the faded blue siding and illuminating the living room windows. I burst through the front door, already calling out, "Mom! Dad! I got in! Columbia accepted me!" The house echoed with my excitement, but no response came. I checked my watch, 4:30 p.m. My father should have been home from his shift at the manufacturing plant by now, and my mother usually returned from her administrative job at the elementary school by 4. My younger brother Cameron was probably still at basketball practice. I moved through the quiet house, letter still in hand, and found them sitting silently at the kitchen table. The atmosphere struck me immediately. Something was wrong. My father's face was set in the hard lines that appeared whenever our family faced financial difficulties. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed, her hands clutching a crumpled tissue. "What's going on?" I asked, my excitement dimming. "Is everything okay?" My father looked up, his expression not softening when he saw me. "Your timing is interesting, Alex." I held up the letter, hoping to break through whatever tension filled the room. "I got into Columbia, engineering program, with a scholarship." My mother attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That's wonderful, honey." "What's wrong?" I asked again, setting the letter on the table and taking a seat across from them. "Did something happen?" My father cleared his throat, the sound harsh in the quiet kitchen. "I've been laid off. The plant is moving operations overseas. 300 workers, gone." The news hit me like a physical blow. My father had worked at Rochester Manufacturing for 23 years. The company made automotive parts and had been the backbone of our local economy for generations. "When did you find out?" "This morning," my mother said softly. "They gave 2 weeks severance for every year of service, but it won't last forever," my father interrupted. "Not with the mortgage, car payments, your brother's medical bills from his surgery last year." I nodded, processing this. Information. Cameron's ACL reconstruction after a basketball injury had been expensive, even with insurance. Our family had always lived paycheck to paycheck, with minimal savings for emergencies. "I understand," I said, reaching for solutions. "I can increase my hours at the bookstore, maybe pick up another part-time job this summer before college. And the scholarship will help." "About college," my father cut in, his voice taking on the tone he used when decisions had already been made. "We've been looking at the numbers all afternoon. We can't do it, Alex. Not Columbia, not now." I stared at him, not comprehending at first. "What do you mean?" "He means," my mother said gently, that with your father's situation, we can't contribute to your college expenses. The community college has excellent programs, and you could live at home. But I have the scholarship, I protested. And Grandma and Grandpa's college fund. My father's expression darkened. That fund barely has $15,000 in it. Your grandparents meant well, but their fixed incomes didn't allow for much contribution. Columbia costs over $80,000 a year with room and board. I know the costs, I said, my voice rising slightly. I've been researching financial aid options for months, with loans and work-study programs. Absolutely not, my father slammed, his palm on the table. No daughter of mine is starting adult life buried in debt. It's irresponsible. It's my debt to take on, I countered. My education, my choice. While you live under this roof, you'll abide by our financial decisions, he said firmly. And we've decided that an expensive private university is off the table. Rochester Community College has a transfer program. You can do 2 years there, then maybe SUNY if things improve. I felt my dream crumbling before my eyes. Dad, this is Columbia. It's one of the best engineering programs in the country. This opportunity? There will be other opportunities, my mother interjected, always the peacemaker. Education is education. The specific school doesn't matter as much as what you make of it. But I knew that wasn't entirely true. The connections, resources, and reputation of Columbia would open doors that a community college simply couldn't. I had worked too hard, sacrificed too much to settle for a backup plan. What about the money I've saved? I asked. Over the past 4 years, I had squirreled away about $7,000 from my part-time jobs, birthday money, and academic competition prizes. You'll need that for books, supplies, and transportation to the community college, my father replied dismissively. Be practical, Alexandra. This family is facing a crisis. Something in his tone, the assumption that my dreams were dispensable, that my hard work could be casually redirected, ignited a spark of rebellion in me. I had always been the dutiful daughter, the responsible eldest child who followed rules and met expectations. But in that moment, something fundamental shifted. Emmy. Going to Columbia, I said quietly but firmly. I'll figure out the finances myself. My father's face reddened. This isn't about what you want. This is about what's possible, what's realistic. You need to grow up and understand that life doesn't hand you everything you want just because you got good grades. I never expected anything to be handed to me, I replied, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I worked for this acceptance. I earned that scholarship. And I'm going to find a way to make this happen. With what money? He demanded. Your little savings? The tooth fairy? Student loans exist for a reason, I said. And there are additional scholarships I can apply for. I've been researching. Loans are financial suicide, he shouted, fully angry now. You'll be paying them back for decades. No child of mine is making such a foolish decision. It's my future, I insisted, standing my ground. My career prospects will be better with a degree from Columbia. The return on investment? Return on investment? My father laughed bitterly. Listen to yourself. You think you understand the real world because you took some economics classes? You don't know the first thing about financial hardship or responsibility. My mother placed a restraining hand on his arm. Robert, please. Let's all calm down and discuss this rationally. Alex, honey, we just want what's best for you. Starting your adult life with massive debt, isn't it? I looked between them, suddenly seeing with painful clarity the fundamental disconnect. They weren't against my education. They were against risk. Their entire lives had been built around stability and security. The steady job, the modest house, the predictable trajectory. My ambitions represented uncertainty, potential failure, financial exposure. I understand your concerns, I said carefully. But this is the opportunity of a lifetime for me. I've earned it, and I'm willing to accept the financial responsibilities that come with it. My father stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the linoleum floor. As long as you live in this house, you'll follow our guidance on major financial decisions. And we're telling you, Columbia is not happening. End of discussion. He stormed out of the kitchen, leaving my mother and me in uncomfortable silence. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. He's just worried. About the future, she said softly. Give him time to adjust to losing his job. Maybe in a few weeks we can revisit the conversation. I nodded mechanically, but inside I knew something had broken, not just in that conversation, but in my relationship with my parents. For the first time, I saw clearly that their vision for my life would always be limited by their own fears and experiences. That night, I lay awake in my bedroom, the Columbia acceptance letter on my nightstand, considering options I had never before contemplated. My entire life had been built around being the perfect daughter, responsible, obedient, academically successful. I had never seriously defied my parents' wishes on anything important. But this was my future. My one chance to break out of the cycle of financial insecurity that had defined my family for generations. Columbia wasn't just a prestigious name. It was a gateway to opportunities my parents couldn't even imagine. By morning, I had made my decision. I would find a way to attend Columbia, with or without my parents' blessing. I just needed time to secure additional funding, perhaps defer, for a semester while working full-time. What I didn't realize was that the conflict was about to escalate beyond anything I could have anticipated, and that within 72 hours, I would be standing in the rain, homeless, with nothing but a duffel bag, and the unshakable determination to prove my father's parting words wrong. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next morning, I approached the situation with strategic calm. My parents had always responded better to well-researched arguments than emotional appeals, so I spent hours compiling financial data, loan repayment projections, and employment statistics for Columbia engineering graduates. I created spreadsheets showing how I could manage expenses through a combination of my scholarship, additional grant applications, work-study programs, and reasonable loans. The numbers were tight, but viable. I rehearsed my presentation, anticipating their objections and preparing counterarguments. This wasn't about rebellion. It was about advocating for my future with the same dedication I'd applied to my academics. I believed that with enough evidence and a level-headed approach, they would at least consider my plan. I waited until after dinner, when Cameron was working on homework in his room. My father seemed slightly more relaxed after a day of updating his resume and making calls to industry contacts. My mother had always been more receptive to my aspirations, and I hoped she might help bridge the gap in understanding. I'd like to discuss Columbia again, I began, placing my laptop and printed materials on the kitchen table. I've put together some financial projections I think you should see. My father's expression immediately hardened. I thought I made myself clear yesterday. You did, I acknowledged, but I believe this deserves more thorough consideration. I've researched all the options, and I'd like you to look at the numbers before making a final decision. My mother glanced between us anxiously. Let's at least hear what Alex has to say, Robert. With reluctant permission, I launched into my presentation. I showed them the average starting salaries for Columbia engineering graduates compared to regional college graduates. I outlined my detailed 4-year budget, including part-time work during semesters and full-time summer employment. I explained how strategic loan selection and timely repayment would minimize long-term interest. After accounting for my scholarship and existing savings, I concluded, the loans I would need to take are significant but manageable based on projected income after graduation, The Career Center at Columbia has a 94% placement rate for engineering graduates within 6 months of graduation. My mother looked thoughtful. You've clearly put a lot of work into this, Alex. My father, however, remained unmoved. Numbers on paper don't reflect real-world challenges. What if you can't find a job immediately? What if you have medical expenses? What if the economy tanks again like in 2008? Any plan has risks, I acknowledged. But staying in Rochester and attending community college has its own opportunity costs. The connections and internship possibilities at Columbia substantially increase my chances of career success. This is exactly what's wrong with your generation, my father said, his voice rising. You think a fancy diploma automatically translates to success. I worked my way up without an Ivy League degree, and I provided for this family just fine until the plant closed. I bit back my initial response, that his job security had ultimately proven illusory despite decades of loyalty to one company. That wasn't an argument that would help my case. I'm not dismissing your path, Dad, I said carefully. But the job market has changed since you started your career. Technical fields especially value credentials from top programs. So now you're saying my career choices weren't good enough? He demanded. That's not what I meant. What you meant, he interrupted, is that you're too good for the life we've provided, that you need to escape Rochester and your working-class family to fulfill your potential. Robert, my mother cautioned, that's not fair. No, let's be honest. Here, he continued, fully angry now. Alexandra has always thought she was special, different, better than the rest of us because of her grades and test scores. Well, real life doesn't care about your GPA when bills need paying. His words stung with unfairness. I had never considered myself better than my family. I had worked hard precisely to help create a more secure future for all of us. I'm trying to leverage the opportunities I've earned, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. Not to escape my family, but to build something that could benefit everyone in the long run. My father laughed bitterly. How convenient. You get to pursue your fancy degree in New York City, and somehow that's for our benefit? At least be honest about your selfishness. It's not selfish to want an education that matches my capabilities, I countered, my own anger rising despite my best intentions. I've earned this opportunity through years of hard work. While living under our roof, eating food we provided, using the computer we bought you, he shot back. And now, when this family faces real hardship, your response is to take on massive debt for a luxury education? It's not a luxury. It's an investment in my future. An investment we can't afford. Why can't you understand that? He shouted, slamming his hand on the table. Your brother needs braces. The mortgage payment is due. The health insurance premiums just increased. These are real responsibilities, not theoretical futures. I took a deep breath, trying to de-escalate. I understand our family is in a difficult position. That's why my plan doesn't ask for financial contributions from you. I'm willing to take full responsibility for my education costs. Full responsibility? My father's tone turned dangerously quiet. You're 18, living in our house, with no real concept of adult expenses. You have no idea what full responsibility means. I'm trying to make a reasoned decision about my future, I insisted. I've done the research. Research doesn't pay bills, he exploded. If you're so determined to make adult decisions against our explicit guidance, perhaps you should experience adult consequences. My mother placed a restraining hand on his arm. Robert, you need to calm down. He shrugged her off. No, I'm done with this conversation. Alexandra, your options are simple. Accept our decision about community college, or figure out how to support yourself completely. No more partial independence while living under our roof and eating our food. The ultimatum hung in the air between us. I stared at him, searching for any flexibility in his expression and finding none. My mother looked horrified but remained silent, her conflict evident in her pained expression. "You don't mean that," I said finally. "I absolutely do," he replied. "You want to make life-altering financial decisions against our explicit advice? Then you can do it without our support. You're either part of this family, following our guidance during this difficult time, or you're on your own." I looked to my mother, hoping for intervention, but she avoided my eyes. Her silence was its own message. She wouldn't openly contradict him, not in this volatile moment. "I need to think," I said, gathering my materials with shaking hands. "There's nothing to think about," my father replied. "Community college while living at home or complete independence. Your choice." I retreated to my bedroom, mind racing. I had anticipated resistance, but not an ultimatum that threatened my basic security. For the first time, I understood that this conflict wasn't really about financial prudence. It was about control. The next morning, I left early for my Saturday shift at the bookstore, avoiding another confrontation. Throughout my 8-hour workday, I contemplated my options while alphabetizing self-help books and processing customer returns. My manager, Elaine, noticed my distraction. "Everything okay, Alex?" she asked during our lunch break. "You seem a million miles away today." I hesitated, then shared the abbreviated version of my situation. Elaine, a former literature professor, who had opened the independent bookstore after retirement, listened with growing concern. "That's quite a predicament," she said when I finished. "Have you considered deferring acceptance for a year? You could work full-time, save money, and perhaps your father's employment situation will improve." "I've thought about it," I admitted. "But I'm worried about losing momentum. And honestly, I think the ultimatum has changed things. Even if I deferred, the underlying issue remains. They don't respect my right to make my own decisions about my future." Elaine nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes parents struggle when their children begin asserting independence, especially high-achieving children whose success they've taken pride in directing. It challenges their self-image as providers and protectors. Her insight resonated. My academic achievements had always been a source of family pride, but within parameters they controlled and understood. Columbia represented a departure from those parameters, geographically, financially, and symbolically. When I returned home that evening, the atmosphere was frigid. My father barely acknowledged my presence during dinner. My mother attempted small talk but avoided any mention of college or finances. Cameron, sensing the tension but unaware of its cause, retreated to his room immediately after eating. Sunday passed in similar uncomfortable silence. I spent most of the day at the library, researching housing options in New York and emergency financial aid opportunities. By evening, I had formulated a tentative plan involving deferred enrollment, a gap year of full-time work, and possibly moving in with my mother's sister in New Jersey to establish residency for in-state tuition at Rutgers as a backup option. I returned home prepared to propose this compromise, only to find my parents waiting for me in the living room with expressions that immediately set off internal alarms. "We need to talk," my father said without preamble. I sat across from them, noticing a document on the coffee table between us. "We've been doing some thinking," he continued, "and we've made a decision. If you're determined to defy our guidance on college, you'll need to be fully independent. We've drawn up a rental agreement." I stared at the document in disbelief. "A rental agreement? For my bedroom?" "If you want to make adult decisions, you'll need to take on adult responsibilities," he said flatly. $500 monthly rent, plus 1/4 of the utilities and groceries, starting immediately. The amount was deliberately prohibitive, more than half of my monthly income from the bookstore. It would make saving for college impossible while ensuring I remained financially dependent on them. "This isn't about teaching me responsibility," I said, the realization crystallizing. "This is about making Columbia impossible. This is about reality, my father countered. You think you're ready for independence? Prove it. Pay your own way, starting here. I looked at my mother, who seemed uncomfortable but determined to present a united front with my father. In that moment, I understood that no compromise would be sufficient. The choice was exactly as my father had framed it: complete submission to their vision for my life, or complete independence. I need some air, I said, rising from the couch. You have until tomorrow to decide? My father called. After me. Sign the agreement or find other arrangements. I spent hours walking through our neighborhood, processing this ultimatum and its implications. By the time I returned home, the house was dark and silent. I slipped into my bedroom and made the most consequential decision of my young life. If independence was being forced upon me, I would embrace it completely, not on my father's punitive terms, but on my own. Monday morning arrived with the clarity that sometimes comes after a night of minimal sleep and maximum resolve. I rose before dawn, moving silently through my morning routine with heightened awareness of each familiar detail: the creaking third step on the staircase, the temperamental kitchen faucet that required a specific touch, the way sunlight gradually illuminated the family photos lining the hallway. These mundane features of my childhood home now felt significant as I prepared to leave them behind. I had spent the night carefully evaluating my assets and limitations. My financial situation was straightforward: $3,240 in my savings account, plus $150 in cash from my most recent bookstore paycheck. My material possessions were more complicated to assess. 18 years of accumulated belongings, most with sentimental rather than practical value for the journey ahead. By 6:30 a.m., I had filled one duffel bag with essentials, a week's worth, of clothing, toiletries, my laptop, phone charger, and important documents: birth certificate, social security card, high school diploma, immunization records, and my Columbia acceptance letter. I added my grandmother's silver locket and a small photo album, concessions to sentiment in an otherwise pragmatic selection. My parents typically left for work by 7:30 a.m., giving me a narrow window to execute my plan without direct confrontation. I wrote 2 letters during those quiet morning hours. The first, addressed to my brother Cameron, explained my departure in terms a 14-year-old might understand, emphasizing that my conflict with our parents had nothing to do with him. I tucked this letter under his door, knowing he was a heavy sleeper who wouldn't stir until his 7:15 alarm. The second letter was for my parents. I kept it brief and factual, acknowledging their ultimatum and stating my decision to accept full independence rather than surrender my educational goals. I informed them I would be staying with a friend temporarily while arranging more permanent accommodations. I didn't specify which friend, knowing they might attempt to intervene if they had a specific location to target. I ended by asking them to respect my decision as the adult they had insisted I become. At 7:20 a.m., I heard my parents' typical morning movements: coffee cups clinking, car keys jangling, my father's heavy footsteps toward the front door. I remained in my room, breath held, as they left for work with no knowledge of the decision I had finalized overnight. Once their cars pulled away, I carried my duffel bag downstairs and placed my letter prominently on the kitchen table. I took one final look around the house that had been my only home for 18 years, then walked out the front door, locking it behind me. My first destination was the bank, where I withdrew all but $100 from my savings account. Keeping a small amount in the account would prevent it from being automatically closed, giving me continued access to direct deposit for my final bookstore paychecks. I then proceeded to the bookstore itself, though my shift wasn't scheduled until afternoon. Elaine looked up in surprise as I entered, carrying my duffel bag. "Alex, you're hours early." "I need your advice," I said simply, then explained the situation in full detail for the first time. Elaine listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly concerned. "So, you've left home," she said when I finished. with no established place to go. Yes, I acknowledged. I have funds for temporary accommodations while I figure out next steps. I was hoping I could store my bag here during my shift today. Elaine's response exceeded my expectations. You can stay with me, she offered immediately. My spare room has been empty since my daughter moved to Chicago last year. It's yours for as long as you need it. Her generosity momentarily overwhelmed me. I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition, she interrupted firmly. It's pragmatic. You're one of my best employees, working toward a worthy goal. Providing temporary housing ensures you can maintain your employment here while transitioning to independence. She presented the arrangement as a business decision, correctly intuiting that I would accept practical assistance more readily than charity. We agreed that I would contribute $200 monthly toward household expenses, a fair amount that would still allow me to save for Columbia while establishing the financial responsibility my father had accused me of lacking. With immediate housing secured, I focused on my shift, greeting customers with a composure that belied the dramatic change in my circumstances. During my break, I contacted Columbia's financial aid office to explain my changed situation and inquire about additional assistance options as an independent student. The administrator I spoke with was professionally sympathetic, explaining that aid reassessment was possible but would require documentation of my independent status, a process that could take months. By closing time, the adrenaline that had carried me through the day was waning, leaving space for the emotional weight of my decision to surface. As Elaine drove us to her cozy bungalow on the outskirts of Rochester, the reality of my situation hit fully. I had left home with one bag and limited funds, severing the safety net that had supported me for 18 years. The magnitude of this change threatened to overwhelm me. Elaine seemed to sense my emotional state. The spare room needs fresh sheets, she said matter-of-factly as we entered her house. The bathroom is down the hall to the right. I'll show you how the shower works. It has quirks. And I typically make coffee at 6 a.m. if you'd like some before your morning classes. Her practical focus on immediate logistics provided an anchor as we established the parameters of our new arrangement. The spare room was small but comfortable, with a twin bed, desk, and empty bookshelf. After showing me around, Elaine left me to settle in, respecting my need for privacy during this transition. Alone in the unfamiliar room, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not from regret or fear, but from the sheer intensity of crossing a threshold that could not be uncrossed. I had chosen independence without fully understanding its emotional dimensions. The path forward was mine alone to navigate, a reality both liberating and terrifying. My phone, which I had kept on silent throughout the day, showed 17 missed calls and numerous text messages when I finally checked it. Most were from my mother, progressing from confused. "Where are you? We found your letter." To worried. "Please just let us know you're safe." To hurt. "I don't understand why you couldn't discuss this with us." There were fewer messages from my father, his tone evolving from angry, "This is incredibly immature and irresponsible," to ultimatum, "This tantrum needs to end. Come home and we'll talk." Cameron had texted a simple, "Whatever they did, it's boring here without you. Let me know you're okay." I responded only to Cameron, reassuring him of my safety without revealing my location. To my parents, I sent a single message. "I am safe and staying with a responsible adult. I'll be in touch when I'm ready to talk. Please respect my decision." Then I turned to the practical tasks that would define my new reality: creating a budget spreadsheet, researching college deferment policies, planning my class schedule for the remainder of high school senior year, and listing items I would need to purchase with my limited funds. These concrete activities provided focus when emotions threatened to overwhelm me. The following morning brought the first test of my resolve. When I arrived at school, I was immediately summoned to the IE guidance counselor's office. Mrs. Patel, who had helped me with my college applications, looked concerned as I entered. "Your mother called this morning," she began. "She's worried about you, Alexandra. She said you've left home?" I sat across from her desk, back straight. "Yes. My parents and I have different views on my educational future. They presented an ultimatum that would make attending Columbia impossible, so I chose independence." Mrs. Patel's expression remained neutral, professional. "That's a significant decision for someone your age. Do you have safe accommodations?" "Yes, with a responsible adult who's been my employer for over a year. I have savings, ongoing employment, and a clear plan for my education." She studied me for a moment. "You understand that as a school employee, I have obligations regarding the welfare of students. However, at 18, you're legally an adult capable of making your own housing decisions." "I understand," I replied. "I'm not in any danger and my academic performance won't suffer. I intend to complete senior year with the same standards I've always maintained." After a few more questions about my living situation and mental well-being, Mrs. Patel seemed satisfied that intervention wasn't warranted. Before I left, she offered practical assistance that proved invaluable. Information about independent, student status for financial aid purposes, scholarship opportunities specifically for students in unusual circumstances, and resources for young adults transitioning to independence. The next 2 weeks established the patterns of my new life. I maintained perfect attendance at school, worked additional hours at the bookstore when possible, and began researching more affordable alternatives to Columbia that might offer comparable engineering programs with better financial aid packages. I spoke with Cameron on the phone twice, careful conversations that navigated around the conflict with our parents while maintaining our sibling bond. My father made no further attempts to contact me directly. My mother's messages grew less frequent, but more emotional, alternating between pleas to come home and expressions of hurt that I had chosen Columbia over family. I responded sparingly, maintaining boundaries while occasionally reassuring her of my continued safety and academic dedication. The most difficult moment came when I received notification that my parents had withdrawn the remaining $376 from my college savings account, funds that had been gifts from relatives earmarked for my education, but legally under my parents' control as custodians. This financial setback was significant, but not devastating to my plans. More painful was the symbolic statement. If I chose independence, they would withhold even resources specifically designated for my future. Rather than discouraging me, this action crystallized my resolve. The withdrawn funds represented approximately 1/10 of one semester's expenses at Columbia, a meaningful amount to me now, but ultimately a small fraction of the total investment my education would require. If my parents believed this financial penalty would force my return to their vision for my life, they had fundamentally misunderstood the depth of my commitment to charting my own course. That evening, as rain pattered against the windows of my temporary bedroom, I made a promise to myself. Every obstacle would strengthen rather than diminish my determination. Every financial challenge would sharpen my resource management skills. Every emotional struggle would develop resilience I would need in the competitive world of engineering. And someday, when I had built something substantial through my own efforts, I would face my parents again, not seeking approval or validation, but as living proof that believing in myself had been the right decision all along. What I couldn't anticipate then, sheltered in Elaine's spare room with a $150 in my wallet and determination in my heart, was exactly how that future confrontation would unfold, or the complex path that would lead me from that rainy night to the boardroom where I would eventually present my parents with an unexpected opportunity and an unspoken reckoning. By mid-May, graduation loomed just weeks away. While my classmates excitedly discussed dorm room assignments and freshman orientation schedules, I navigated a different reality. My temporary arrangement in Elaine's spare room had stabilized into a functional routine, but the larger questions about my educational future remained unresolved. Columbia's financial aid office had been responsive but limited in what they could offer. Despite submitting documentation of my independent status, the additional grants they approved would still leave me with an insurmountable funding gap. The deferment option remained viable, but with each passing week, I questioned whether a year of working retail would significantly change my financial picture. On a Tuesday afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Dr. Lillian Chen, my AP, physics teacher and research mentor for the past 2 years. "Alexandra, do you have time to stop by my classroom after school today? There's an opportunity I'd like to discuss with you." When I arrived at her classroom, I found not just Dr. Chen, but also Mr. Grayson from AP Computer Science waiting. The serious expressions on their faces immediately piqued my curiosity. "We understand your college plans have encountered some complications," Dr. Chen began diplomatically. "Financial complications," I clarified. "My academic acceptance isn't in question." Mr. Grayson nodded. "That's precisely why we wanted to speak with you. We've received information about a new scholarship program at Massachusetts Institute of Technology specifically for women in engineering. The deadline is this Friday." My heart rate quickened. MIT was on my original application list, but I didn't receive enough financial aid to make it viable. "This is different," Dr. Chen explained, handing me a packet of information. "It's called the Future Engineers Initiative. Full tuition, room and board for 4 years, plus summer internship placements. Only 20 students nationwide will receive it." I scanned the materials, mind racing. MIT's engineering program was comparable to Columbia's in prestige and quality. The application required an original research proposal, academic transcripts, recommendation letters, and a personal essay, all materials I had in some form from my previous college applications, though they would need substantial adaptation for this specific opportunity. "The timeline is extremely tight," Mr. Grayson acknowledged. "But we both believe you're an ideal candidate, and we're prepared to help with recommendations and application review if you decide to pursue it." "Why would MIT still be accepting applications this late in the cycle?" I asked. "The program was funded just last month by a tech billionaire alumna," Dr. Chen explained. "They're expediting the selection process to begin this fall." That evening, I weighed my options carefully. Columbia had been my dream school, particularly for its urban setting and connections to New York's technology sector. However, MIT offered equally prestigious engineering education with potentially stronger research opportunities. If this scholarship materialized, it would transform my situation from financial precarity to complete security. I had exactly 72 hours to prepare a competitive application for one of the most selective universities in the world. The challenge was daunting, but energizing. For the next 3 days, I operated on minimal sleep and maximum focus. I reworked my research proposal on sustainable urban infrastructure systems, incorporating feedback from both teachers. I rewrote my personal essay to emphasize my recent experiences with independence and financial self-sufficiency, framing these challenges as preparation for the rigorous problem-solving demanded in engineering. By Friday afternoon, my application was complete. Dr. Chen reviewed it one final time before I submitted it electronically, just 2 hours before the deadline. "This is excellent work, Alexandra," she said, returning my laptop. "I don't make predictions about these things, but I will say this. Regardless of the outcome, your response to this opportunity demonstrates exactly the qualities these programs seek: resourcefulness, intellectual agility, and determination under pressure." As May turned to June, graduation arrived. I walked across the stage to receive my diploma with no family members in the audience. Elaine attended instead, cheering loudly enough to compensate for my parents' absence. Afterward, several teachers quietly congratulated me not just on my academic achievements, but on my perseverance through personal challenges that had become common knowledge among the faculty. The week after graduation brought 2 significant developments. First, I received a formal letter from Columbia acknowledging my deferment request and confirming my place in the following year's engineering class. Second, I was notified that I had advanced to the finalist round for the MIT scholarship, with a virtual interview scheduled for the following week. The day of the MIT interview, I borrowed Elaine's home office to ensure a professional setting. The panel consisted of 3 professors and an administrative director, all women with impressive credentials in various engineering disciplines. For 45 minutes, they questioned me about my research interests, academic preparation, and long-term goals. I answered with the confidence that comes from genuine passion and thorough preparation. When they asked about my unusual living situation, which I had referenced in my personal essay, I responded with measured honesty. My parents and I fundamentally disagreed about the value of investing in elite engineering education. When forced to choose between their vision for my future and my own, I chose independence. That decision has required significant adjustments, but has ultimately strengthened my commitment to pursuing engineering at the highest level. 10 days later, while restocking science fiction novels at the bookstore, I received an email notification that made my hands tremble so violently I nearly dropped an entire shelf of Asimov classics. Dear Ms. Winters, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as a recipient of the Future Engineers Initiative Scholarship at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I read the entire message 3 times to ensure I wasn't misunderstanding. The scholarship covered all tuition, room and board, books, and provided a modest stipend for personal expenses. It included guaranteed research positions during academic years and paid internships each summer with partner technology companies. The total value over 4 years exceeded $300,000. When I shared the news with Elaine that evening, her eyes filled with tears of joy. "I knew you could do it," she said, embracing me. "From the day you showed up with that duffel bag, I knew you were going to prove everyone wrong." The validation was sweet, but it came with complicated emotions. My achievement existed in stark contrast to my family's absence. Despite our ongoing estrangement, I felt compelled to share this news with my parents, not seeking reconciliation, but simply because this milestone seemed incomplete without their knowledge. After careful consideration, I composed a brief, factual email to my mother. "I wanted to inform you that I've been awarded a full scholarship to MIT's engineering program beginning this fall. All expenses are covered. I'm well and continuing to work at the bookstore until August orientation." Her response came the next day, shorter than I expected. "Congratulations. Your father and I hope this brings you happiness. Cameron misses you." The brevity and emotional distance stung, but I refused to let it diminish my achievement. Their inability to directly acknowledge the vindication of my decision, the proof that my assessment of my educational needs had been correct, was their limitation, not mine. July brought another unexpected development. Through MIT's housing department, I connected with my assigned roommate, Priya Narayan, a scholarship recipient from Chicago, whose academic interests in sustainable engineering aligned closely with mine. Our initial video call extended to 3 hours as we discovered shared interests not just in engineering, but in photography, dystopian fiction, and obscure indie music. "My parents want to drive me to campus for move-in day," Priya mentioned. "I told them about your situation, and they offered to pick you up on their way through New York if you need transportation." The kindness of this offer from complete strangers caught me off guard. That's incredibly generous, but Rochester is hardly on the way from Chicago to Cambridge. "They're making a road trip of it," Priya explained. "My dad is a huge Baseball Hall of Fame nerd, so they're stopping in Cooperstown anyway. Rochester would just be a small detour." The Narayans' offer symbolized a pattern that had emerged since my departure from home. The appearance of unexpected support at critical junctures, from Elaine's spare room to my teacher's scholarship nomination, to this transportation solution. These weren't coincidences, but the natural result of the connections I had cultivated through genuine engagement with my work and community. The first weekend in August, I gave notice at the bookstore. Elaine organized a farewell gathering with the staff, presenting me with a care package of books, coffee shop gift cards, and a beautiful leather journal embossed with my initials. "For recording the beginning of your next chapter," she said, hugging me tightly. As my departure date approached, I faced the question of whether to attempt reconciliation with my parents before leaving Rochester. After much reflection, I decided against it. The wounds were still too fresh, the fundamental disagreement unresolved. Perhaps distance and time would create space for eventual healing, but forcing a reunion now would serve neither their needs nor mine. I did, however, arrange to meet Cameron at a cafe downtown. At 15, he had grown 2 inches since I'd last seen him and developed a newfound interest in computer programming that gave us common ground for conversation. "Mom cries sometimes when she thinks no one's looking," he told me over hot chocolate. "And Dad works all the time since he got the new job at the automotive plant. They don't talk about you much, but your room is exactly the same." "I'm sorry this has been hard on you," I said, genuinely remorseful for the position my departure had put him in. He shrugged with teenage-affected nonchalance. "It's whatever. They were wrong, you know, about you not amounting to anything. MIT is legit." "Thanks, Cam," I said, throat tightening. "That means a lot." "Can I visit you sometime, in Boston?" he asked hesitantly. "Absolutely," I promised. "Anytime, and we'll video chat regularly." The day the Narayans arrived to collect me marked exactly 3 months since I had walked out of my parents' house with a duffel bag and 150-cent Evans. Now I had 3 suitcases containing my expanded but still modest possessions, a full scholarship to one of the world's premier engineering programs, and a clear vision for my future that extended far beyond undergraduate education. As we drove east toward Massachusetts, watching the New York countryside roll past, I reflected on the exponential personal growth these challenging months had catalyzed. I had discovered capacities for resilience, strategic planning, and adaptive problem-solving that no classroom could have taught me. These qualities would serve me well in engineering, a field fundamentally concerned with overcoming obstacles through creative application of principles and resources. What I didn't yet realize was how these same qualities would eventually lead me to found my own technology company, develop patented innovations in sustainable infrastructure, and ultimately find myself in a position to acquire the struggling manufacturing conglomerate that had absorbed my father's former employer. That particular plot twist in my journey still lay 7 years in the future, a future I was now free to create entirely on my own terms. MIT's campus welcomed me with a curious contradiction. Gothic and Romanesque architecture housing cutting-edge research laboratories, tradition and innovation coexisting in brick and glass. During orientation week, I wandered through the infinite corridor connecting the main buildings, absorbing the energy of a place where intellectual ambition was the norm rather than the exception. The Future Engineers Initiative scholars received special orientation sessions beyond the standard freshman programming. In a sunlit conference room overlooking the Charles River, Dr. Farida Kapoor, the program director, addressed our cohort of 20 women from diverse backgrounds across the country. "You were selected not just for your academic excellence," she explained, "but for your demonstrated capacity to overcome obstacles through innovative thinking. That quality, the ability to see challenges as design problems awaiting solutions, is what defines successful engineers." Her words resonated deeply as I looked around at my fellow scholars. Each had her own story of persistence, though I doubted many had left home with just a duffel bag and pocket change. Regardless of our different paths, we shared a common determination that transcended traditional metrics of preparedness or privilege. Classes began with the infamous drinking from a fire hose intensity that MIT was known for. The core curriculum for engineering freshmen was deliberately challenging, a foundation of calculus, physics, chemistry, and programming that demanded precision, creativity, and relentless work ethic. For the first time in my academic life, I was surrounded by peers who matched or exceeded my capabilities, creating an environment of both competition and collaboration that pushed everyone to higher achievement. My roommate Priya and I developed a symbiotic study relationship, her strengths in theoretical physics complementing my more intuitive grasp of structural principles and computational modeling. Our dorm room transformed each evening into a problem-solving laboratory, walls covered with whiteboards filled with equations and diagrams that often puzzled our floormates from non-technical majors. October brought my first significant engineering project, designing and building a small-scale solar-powered desalination system with real-world applications for water-scarce regions. The assignment required not just technical proficiency, but consideration of economic feasibility, cultural implementation factors, and environmental impact. I found myself drawing on unexpected resources from my previous life, customer service skills from the bookstore when interviewing potential end users, financial discipline developed during my independence when calculating cost-benefit ratios, and resilience built through personal challenges when our initial prototype failed spectacularly during testing. "This is exactly what engineering looks like in practice," Professor Whitaker commented, as our team scrambled to redesign critical components before the submission deadline. The difference between good engineers and great ones isn't avoiding failures. It's responding to them with analytical precision and creative adaptation. When our redesigned system not only functioned but exceeded efficiency parameters for the assignment, the satisfaction transcended any academic achievement from my high school years. I wasn't just meeting preset expectations. I was solving real problems with tangible impact potential. As fall semester progressed, I maintained limited contact with my family. Bi-weekly video calls with Cameron allowed me to guide his growing interest in programming while hearing sanitized updates about our parents. My mother occasionally sent brief text messages, surface-level inquiries about my classes and Boston, whether that carefully avoided deeper reconciliation attempts. My father remained entirely silent, his absence from these communications its own form of communication. The holiday break presented my first significant emotional challenge. While most students returned home for 3 weeks between semesters, the dormitories remained open for international students and those with complicated home situations. I found myself among a small community of about 40 students who represented a global tapestry of circumstances. Scholars from countries experiencing political turmoil, LGBTQ+ students estranged from unaccepting families, and others like me navigating complex family fractures. Rather than allowing the holiday to become a period of isolation or self-pity, this unexpected community created our own traditions. We organized a multicultural potluck where I contributed my grandmother's famous apple tart, the only family recipe I had memorized. We held a gift exchange with a strict $15 limit that produced remarkably thoughtful presents. I received a hand-bound notebook made from recycled engineering drafts with a cover embossed with the MIT motto, Mens et Manus, mind and hand. The most meaningful moment came on Christmas Eve, when Dr. Kapoor invited all remaining future engineers scholars to dinner at her Cambridge apartment. As we gathered around her dining table, 3 of us from the program plus 2 international doctoral candidates she advised, she shared a perspective that transformed my understanding of my situation. "Family takes many forms," she said, raising her glass in a toast. "There's the family we're born into, and there's the family we build. The community of minds that nurtures our growth and challenges our limitations. Both have value, but the second kind we choose deliberately, with mature understanding of our needs and contributions." During that dinner, I learned that Dr. Kapoor had experienced her own family estrangement decades earlier when pursuing engineering, against her parents' wishes in 1980s India. Her journey from that conflict to her current position as a distinguished MIT professor and program director offered a possible future trajectory for my own path. The reconciliation with my parents came eventually, she told me privately as she walked me back to the dormitory. But not because I compromised my ambitions. It came when my success became too substantial to dismiss, too clearly aligned with my authentic capabilities for them to maintain the fiction that I had made a mistake. Her words stayed with me through the quiet campus nights of that holiday break, offering both comfort and a strategic framework for moving forward. I wasn't simply waiting for my parents to accept me back. I was building a foundation of achievement that would eventually bridge the gap their limitations had created. January brought not just the intensity of a new semester, but my first summer internship placement through the scholarship program. While most freshmen wouldn't begin considering summer positions until spring, the Future Engineers Initiative coordinated early matches based on our emerging interests and aptitudes. I was assigned to Navatech, a mid-sized engineering firm specializing in sustainable infrastructure projects across the Northeast. Their Boston office was developing modular, energy-efficient desalination systems for coastal communities facing increased water scarcity due to climate change, a perfect alignment with my first semester project focus. By March, I had settled into the rigorous rhythm of MIT life, challenging coursework, research assistantship in the Urban Systems Laboratory, preparation for my summer internship, and emerging friendships that provided both intellectual stimulation and emotional support. My financial situation, once my primary concern, had stabilized through the comprehensive scholarship and modest campus employment in the engineering library. The real transformation, however, was internal. I no longer defined myself in opposition to my parents' limitations or through the lens of their rejection. I had become fueled by positive ambition rather than reactive determination, pursuing excellence because it aligned with my authentic capabilities, not to prove my father wrong. This shift became evident during spring break when Priya invited me to Chicago to meet her family. The Narayans welcomed me into their home with genuine warmth, treating me not as their daughter's unfortunate roommate, but as a valued guest with my own identity and accomplishments. During a quiet moment helping Mrs. Narayan prepare dinner, she asked thoughtfully about my family situation. I found myself explaining it without the emotional charge that had previously colored such conversations. My parents couldn't envision the future I knew I was capable of creating, I said, carefully chopping vegetables beside her. Their perspective was shaped by valid concerns about financial security, but also by limited exposure to possibilities beyond their experience. Our separation isn't about rejection of them, but about making space for growth they couldn't accommodate. Mrs. Narayan nodded, her expression reflecting understanding rather than pity. When Priya was 10, she built a working robot from household electronics our neighbors had discarded. I was terrified she would electrocute herself or burn down the house. Her father, though, he saw something I didn't. He said, "This child needs space to create, even if it makes us uncomfortable." That was my learning moment as a parent. My parents never had that moment, I reflected. Perhaps they still might, she suggested gently. Growth isn't limited to the young. That conversation planted a seed of possibility I hadn't previously considered, that my parents' capacity for understanding might evolve over time, independent of my efforts to convince them. Their journey was separate from mine, unfolding according to its own timeline and catalysts. Returning to campus after spring break, I channeled this developing perspective into a new personal project. Inspired by conversations with other students facing housing insecurity during academic breaks, I began researching temporary accommodation networks for college students estranged from families or facing home environment challenges. Working with MIT's Student Support Services and drawing on my own experience, I developed a proposal for a registry connecting students needing temporary housing with alumni, faculty, and community members willing to provide it during breaks. The system would include verification processes, compatibility matching, and clear expectations for both hosts and students. When I presented the concept to the Associate Dean of Student Life, her response was unexpected. This addresses a significant need we've struggled to meet institutionally. Would you be interested in developing this into a pilot program with departmental support? By the end of freshman year, my housing network initiative had secured modest funding, established protocols, and matched 15 students with appropriate break housing for the summer. What began as a personal response to my own circumstances had evolved into a structural solution with potential for expansion to other universities. As May concluded and I prepared for my summer internship at Novatech, I received an unexpected email from Cameron. Mom and Dad are fighting a lot. Dad's company is struggling. Something about international competition and tariffs. He's worried about being laid off again. Thought you should know. This information arrived as I was packing for a 10-week internship that would provide not just professional experience but a $12,000 stipend, more than my father had earned in some difficult months. The contrast between our trajectories was becoming increasingly pronounced, not through any vindictive design, but through the natural consequences of our different approaches to uncertainty and opportunity. I responded to Cameron with concern about our parents' situation, but without offering financial assistance. At 19, with my education secured but no substantial savings, I wasn't in a position to meaningfully help, even if doing so wouldn't have complicated our already strained relationship. More importantly, I recognized that financial intervention wouldn't address the fundamental limitations in their approach to security and opportunity. As I settled into my Novatech internship that June, I focused on absorbing every aspect of engineering practice in a professional environment, technical skills, project management methodologies, client communication approaches, and business development strategies. My supervisor, Eliza Donovan, was one of few female senior engineers at the firm, and she took particular interest in my professional development. "You have unusual maturity for an intern," she observed after I successfully presented our team's preliminary designs to a municipal client. "Most first years are technically competent, but struggle with the human dimensions of engineering practice." "I've had crash courses in adaptation and stakeholder management outside the classroom," I replied with a smile, offering no further explanation. What I couldn't articulate then, even to myself, was how thoroughly my forced independence had prepared me for professional challenges. Every obstacle at Novatech seemed manageable compared to rebuilding my life from a duffel bag and $157. Every difficult client interaction was navigable after the emotional complexity of separating from my family. Every technical problem had clearer parameters than the open-ended challenge of creating an independent future at 18. My performance during that internship exceeded expectations, resulting in an unprecedented offer for a continuing relationship throughout my undergraduate years, paid project work during academic terms, and guaranteed summer positions with increasing responsibilities. As I returned to MIT for sophomore year, the blueprint of my transformation was becoming clear. The abrupt severing from my previous life had forced rapid development of capabilities that might otherwise have emerged more gradually or not at all. Independence hadn't just been a response to rejection. It had been the catalyst for accelerated growth across multiple dimensions. What I couldn't yet see was how these same capabilities, resourcefulness, strategic vision, and adaptive problem-solving, would eventually lead me to identify a market opportunity that would transform not just my professional trajectory, but the fundamental relationship between engineering solutions and community implementation. The seeds of that innovation were already present in my approach to challenges, waiting for the right conditions to flourish into something that would eventually bring me face to face with my parents under circumstances none of us could have imagined. By the beginning of junior year at MIT, my life had developed a rhythmic intensity that felt both challenging and natural. Academic excellence was no longer something I pursued to prove my worth, but simply the standard I set for myself. My continued internship relationship with Novatech had evolved into collaborative research on modular water treatment systems, with my name included on 2 pending patents for component designs I had developed. The housing network for students with challenging home situations had expanded to 15 universities across the Northeast, with a formal nonprofit structure and grant funding. What began as a personal solution had grown into an organization, helping hundreds of students maintain educational momentum despite family disruptions. While my academic and professional trajectory continued upward, communication with my family remained limited and strained. Cameron visited once each semester, our sibling bond strengthening through his growing interest in computer science and my ability to mentor his projects. Our conversations carefully navigated around our parents' circumstances, though he occasionally let details slip. Our father's company facing increasing financial pressure, our mother taking on additional administrative work at a medical office, the family home needing repairs they struggled to afford. In October of junior year, Dr. Kapoor called me into her office with an unexpected opportunity. The department has received a special research grant from WaterCore Technologies for innovative approaches to decentralized water purification in urban environments, she explained. I'd like you to lead the undergraduate research team. My surprise must have been evident. Lead? Not just participate? Dr. Kapoor smiled. Your work at Navatech has given you more practical implementation experience than most of our doctoral candidates. You've demonstrated exceptional ability to translate theoretical concepts into functional designs. This project needs that specific capability. The assignment represented a significant advancement. Undergraduate students rarely led research teams, particularly on corporate-sponsored projects with real-world implementation potential. I would be responsible for coordinating 4 other students, managing a substantial budget, and delivering measurable outcomes within an aggressive timeline. The grant includes a $25,000 stipend for the team leader position, Dr. Kapoor added. It would require reducing your Navatech hours, but would significantly enhance your graduate school applications. The decision was straightforward from an academic and professional perspective. The WaterCore project offered greater visibility, leadership experience, and financial benefit. When I discussed the opportunity with Eliza at Navatech, she supported my decision while suggesting a continued consulting arrangement for specific projects where my expertise was relevant. This is how engineering careers develop, she noted. Not through linear progression, but through strategic pivots toward opportunities that combine your skills in novel contexts. Within weeks of accepting the WaterCore leadership position, I found myself immersed in the complex challenge of decentralized water treatment for urban environments where conventional infrastructure was either failing or non-existent. The research required integrating multiple disciplines: material science, fluid dynamics, renewable energy, user interface design, and economic viability modeling. Our 5-person team represented diverse specializations, with my role focusing on system integration and practical implementation. The dynamic reminded me of Elaine's cramped spare room 3 years earlier: constrained resources demanding creative solutions, uncertain timelines requiring flexible planning, and success depending on transforming limitations into opportunities. As we developed early prototypes, I insisted on implementation considerations that academic research often overlooked: maintenance requirements in resource-limited environments, cultural factors affecting user adoption, and community ownership, structures for sustainable operation. These elements weren't included in the original research parameters, but derived from my observations at Navatech, where brilliantly engineered solutions sometimes failed due to human and contextual factors. In December, we presented our initial designs to WaterCore executives, including their CEO, Marcus Holloway, a former MIT engineering graduate who had built his company around democratizing water access technologies. The presentation exceeded standard academic formats, incorporating not just technical specifications, but implementation scenarios and community integration models. Afterward, Holloway requested a private conversation. "Your approach is different from typical academic research," he observed as we walked through the winter quiet campus. "You're thinking about these systems as community infrastructure, not just engineering problems. The most elegant technical solution fails if people can't or won't use it, I replied. Engineering doesn't exist in theoretical space. It lives in communities with specific needs and constraints. That perspective is surprisingly rare, he said, especially in someone who hasn't experienced implementation failures firsthand. Where did you develop it? The question invited a personal disclosure I typically avoided in professional contexts. After brief consideration, I offered a limited version of my background. I've navigated significant resource constraints in my personal life. When your margin for error is narrow, you become attuned to practical viability, not just theoretical excellence. Holloway nodded thoughtfully. WaterCore began because I grew up in rural Nevada, where water access determined everything from economic development to public health. Personal connection to the problem creates different solution frameworks. This conversation marked the beginning of a significant mentorship relationship. Beyond his official role as research sponsor, Holloway began providing informal guidance on translating technical innovation into viable business models, a dimension of engineering education often underdeveloped in academic settings. As spring semester progressed, our research team achieved breakthrough results with a modular water purification system combining solar power, advanced filtration, and simplified maintenance requirements. The design could be scaled from individual household units to neighborhood-level implementation, with component replacement possible using locally available materials in most environments. When we demonstrated a working prototype that exceeded the project parameters for energy efficiency and contaminant removal, WaterCore extended the research grant for an additional year and increased funding by 40%. Holloway also offered summer positions at WaterCore headquarters in Denver for the entire research team. This opportunity presented a practical dilemma. Accepting would mean declining Navatech's standing summer position and relocating temporarily to Colorado. The WaterCore position offered substantially higher compensation and direct corporate research experience, but Navatech had been my professional home base for 2 years, providing stability during my academic journey. When I sought Dr. Kapoor's advice, her perspective clarified the decision. Engineering careers aren't built through loyalty to a single organization, but through progressive challenges that expand your capabilities. Navatech gave you excellent foundation, but WaterCore represents progression toward systems-level innovation. The summer at WaterCore transformed my understanding of engineering's commercial applications. While Navatech operated primarily through government contracts and established infrastructure projects, WaterCore demonstrated how disruptive technologies could create entirely new market categories while addressing fundamental human needs. Holloway's leadership style emphasized both technical excellence and human impact, measuring success not just through profit margins, but through accessibility metrics and implementation success rates. His approach resonated with values I had developed. Through my unconventional path, resource efficiency, adaptability to constraints, and solutions that empowered rather than created dependency. During my final week in Denver, Holloway invited me to dinner at his home, where I met his family and several company executives in an informal setting. As we discussed future directions for water treatment technologies, he unexpectedly raised the possibility of post-graduation employment. "We don't typically recruit undergraduates directly," he explained, "but your combination of technical skill and implementation perspective is exactly what we need for our next development phase. I'd like you to consider joining WaterCore after you complete your degree." The offer was both flattering and disorienting. While most of my peers were just beginning to consider post-graduation options, I was receiving a direct path into a growing company at a level typically reserved for candidates with graduate degrees or years of experience. "I've been planning to pursue a master's immediately after graduating," I replied, adhering to the carefully structured plan I had developed since freshman year. "Advanced degrees have value," Holloway acknowledged, "but timing matters. Right now, WaterCore is positioned for significant expansion into international markets where your specific capabilities would have immediate impact. Graduate education will always be available, but this particular opportunity window is time-sensitive. I promise to consider the offer seriously, recognizing its potential to accelerate my professional trajectory, while challenging my assumptions about necessary career sequencing. The conversation continued to resonate as I returned to MIT for senior year, prompting deeper reflection on my ultimate objectives beyond academic achievement. Fall semester brought another unexpected development when an article about the student housing network I had founded was featured in a national publication, highlighting innovative solutions to educational access challenges. The publicity generated interest from several foundations seeking to support expansion to additional universities. This attention created a secondary opportunity when a venture capital firm specializing in social impact initiatives invited me to present the model to their investment committee. Though the housing network operated as a nonprofit, the investors saw potential for a hybrid approach that could generate modest returns while scaling the solution nationally. Suddenly, I was navigating multiple significant opportunities: the WaterCore employment offer, potential expansion of the housing network with substantial funding, and the traditional graduate school path I had originally planned. Each direction offered distinct advantages and development trajectories, creating a decision point reminiscent of the one I had faced at 18, though with considerably more favorable options. As I deliberated these possibilities, Cameron's winter break visit brought unexpected news from home. Our father's company had experienced another round of layoffs, though he had retained his position with reduced hours and benefits. Our mother had developed health issues requiring regular treatments partially covered by increasingly expensive insurance. My transition from MIT graduate to WaterCore's engineering team happened with remarkable efficiency. Within 2 weeks of receiving my degree, I relocated to Denver and began work as a project development specialist, a position created specifically to leverage my unique combination of technical expertise and implementation perspective. The role placed me at the intersection of research and deployment, translating promising prototypes into field-ready systems. While most new engineers were assigned to specific technical components, my responsibilities encompassed entire system integration and deployment strategy. This unconventional placement for a recent graduate raised eyebrows among some veteran engineers, but Marcus Holloway's confidence in my capabilities quickly silenced initial skepticism. My first major assignment involved adapting our modular water purification technology for a pilot program in water-stressed communities across the southwestern United States. These locations, primarily rural areas and small towns with aging infrastructure, represented the domestic testing ground for systems ultimately destined for international deployment. During preliminary site assessments in Arizona, I encountered implementation challenges that technical specifications hadn't anticipated. In the town of Cooper Basin, local officials expressed concern about maintenance requirements and long-term operational costs. Their existing water treatment facility had failed repeatedly due to maintenance complexities beyond local technical capabilities. We've had 3 different revolutionary systems installed in the past decade, the town's infrastructure manager explained as we examined their deteriorating facility. Each one worked brilliantly for 6 months, then became unusable when specialized components failed. Our people can't wait months for parts or affording flying in technicians from Phoenix. This conversation crystallized what would become my defining insight. The core challenge wasn't creating technologically superior water treatment systems. WaterCore and other companies had already achieved that. The critical gap was between technological capability and community sustainability, systems designed for operational resilience under real-world constraints. That evening in my hotel room, I sketched the initial concept for what I called the Community-Calibrated Implementation framework. Rather than designing systems with optimal technical specifications as the primary goal, this approach would calibrate technology to specific community parameters. local technical skills, available maintenance resources, supply chain reliability, and economic sustainability thresholds. When I presented this framework to Marcus during our weekly call, his response was immediate and enthusiastic. "This inverts the traditional engineering approach," he said. "Instead of asking communities to adapt to our technology, we're adapting our technology to community realities." It's so obvious in retrospect, but nobody's systematized this perspective. With his endorsement, I expanded the concept into a comprehensive methodology that would transform WaterCore's entire development process. Over the next 6 months, we implemented this approach across our pilot sites with remarkable results. System functionality exceeded 98% across all locations after 1 year, an unprecedented reliability rate for decentralized water treatment in challenging environments. The success attracted attention within the industry. When I presented our methodology at the International Water Technology Conference in San Diego, representatives from municipalities, NGOs, and competing companies filled the room. The approach resonated particularly with implementation specialists who had witnessed countless technically impressive systems fail due to contextual misalignment. 18 months into my tenure at WaterCore, Marcus called me into his office with an unexpected proposal. "We need to establish a new division focused entirely on your implementation methodology," he said. "Not just for water systems, but as a framework applicable across infrastructure technologies. I want you to lead it." The offer was staggering. Director-level responsibility for an entirely new business unit at 24 years old. The position would include team-building authority, substantial budget control, and equity compensation, typically reserved for executives with decades of experience. It represented an acceleration of my career timeline beyond anything I had imagined. "This is a significant departure from traditional advancement paths," Marcus acknowledged, addressing my unspoken concerns. "But innovation doesn't follow conventional trajectories, and neither should the innovators who drive it. You've identified a methodology that could fundamentally transform infrastructure deployment globally. The right person to develop it is the one who conceived it." The financial pressure on my parents had intensified, forcing them to refinance the family home and liquidate most of their modest retirement savings. "They would never admit it," Cameron said as we walked along the Charles River. "But they're really struggling. Dad's talked about selling the house and moving to an apartment." The information prompted complex emotions, genuine concern for their well-being mixed with awareness that their current situation reflected the very insecurity they had feared for me, despite their practical approach to my education. The path they had insisted would lead to stability had ultimately proven vulnerable to the same economic forces they had cited when opposing my ambitions. "Have they mentioned me recently?" I asked, immediately regretting the question's nakedly emotional nature. Cameron hesitated, then offered an honest assessment. "Mom keeps your graduation photo on her desk at work. Dad never mentions you directly, but he followed that article about your housing network online. I saw it in his browser history when I was fixing his computer." This glimpse into their silent processing of my development stirred unexpected hope for eventual reconciliation, though I recognized that meaningful resolution would require fundamental shifts in perspective that neither time nor financial circumstances alone could guarantee. The complexity of my family situation informed my approach to the opportunities before me. After careful analysis of each option's alignment with my long-term objectives, I developed an integrated strategy rather than choosing a single exclusive path. I accepted WaterCore's employment offer with negotiated terms that included tuition support for part-time graduate studies and dedicated time for continued involvement with the housing network. This arrangement would allow professional advancement while maintaining academic progression and social impact work, an unconventional combination that reflected my multidimensional priorities. The decision deviated from traditional post-undergraduate trajectories, but aligned perfectly with the independent approach I had developed since leaving home. Conventional wisdom suggested focusing exclusively on either corporate advancement, academic achievement, or social entrepreneurship. My integrated path acknowledged that these domains could be complementary rather than competitive when structured with strategic intention. As graduation approached in May, I faced the question of whether to invite my parents to the ceremony. After consultation with my closest advisors and considerable self-reflection, I sent a simple invitation with no emotional appeals or conditions. Their attendance would represent their choice, just as my educational path had represented mine. 2 weeks before graduation, I received a brief response from my mother. "We are proud of your achievements, but unable to attend due to your father's work schedule and my health treatments. Cameron will represent the family." The message conveyed multiple subtexts: acknowledgement of my success without apology for their opposition, practical obstacles preventing attendance without emotional reconciliation, and continued relationship through Cameron while maintaining parental distance. It was neither rejection nor acceptance, but a measured acknowledgement of our separate paths. I arranged for Cameron to stay in Priya's family's hotel suite during graduation weekend, where the Narayans welcomed him with characteristic warmth. Their continued supportive presence in my life, alongside Elaine, who traveled from Rochester for the ceremony, Dr. Kapoor, and my close MIT community, created a celebration that needed no additional validation. As I crossed the stage to receive my engineering degree with highest honors, the contrast between my current circumstances and that rainy night with $157 and a duffel bag could not have been starker. Beyond the academic achievement, I had constructed a multidimensional foundation for continued growth: professional opportunity at WaterCore, academic advancement through part-time graduate studies, and social impact through the expanding housing network. What I could not anticipate during that moment of achievement was how these seemingly distinct domains would eventually converge around an innovation that would transform not just my career, but an entire segment of the infrastructure industry. Nor could I foresee that this convergence would ultimately create the circumstances for facing my parents again. Not as the rejected daughter seeking approval, but as someone whose vision they would need more than she needed their validation. The foundation was built, the stage was set. The next phase would be construction rather than preparation, creating something substantial enough to reshape not just my future, but the landscapes around me, both professional and personal. I accepted the position after negotiating specific terms: continued flexibility for my part-time graduate studies, allocation of resources for research partnerships with universities implementing the student housing network, and a structured mentorship arrangement with experienced executives to supplement my developing leadership skills. The Community Infrastructure Solutions Division launched officially in January, beginning with a core team of 8 specialists recruited from various departments. Our mandate extended beyond water treatment to encompass multiple infrastructure categories: energy systems, waste management, transportation solutions, and communications technology, all united by the central methodology of designing for community-specific implementation parameters. My leadership style developed through conscious integration of influences from key mentors: Elaine's practical resourcefulness from the bookstore days, Dr. Kapoor's balanced academic rigor, Eliza's technical precision at Novatech, and Marcus's visionary market perspective. I created a team culture that prioritized both analytical excellence and implementation empathy, requiring all designs to satisfy rigorous technical standards while meeting real-world sustainability metrics. The division's first independent project targeted the Four Corners region, where multiple rural communities faced interconnected infrastructure challenges across water, energy, and communications systems. Rather than addressing each technology separately, we developed an integrated approach that leveraged shared resources and maintenance capabilities across systems. The Four Corners initiative demonstrated the power of our methodology when the region experienced an unprecedented drought followed by flash flooding that devastated conventional infrastructure in neighboring communities. Our systems maintained 91% functionality through both extremes, providing critical services when traditional approaches failed completely. This resilience generated significant media coverage, culminating in a feature article in a prominent business publication that highlighted both the technological innovation and the philosophical shift underlying our approach. The article included my personal narrative as context for the methodology's development, describing without embellishment my journey from a teenager leaving home with minimal resources to a pioneering engineer reshaping infrastructure implementation strategies. 2 weeks after publication, I received an unexpected email from my mother, the first direct communication she had initiated in years. "We saw the article about your work at Watercore. Your father and I are trying to understand the path you've chosen. If you're amenable, we would appreciate a conversation when your schedule permits." The message carried no apology for the past, no acknowledgement of their opposition to my education, and no direct congratulations for my achievements. Yet it represented a significant shift. They were reaching toward understanding, rather than expecting my return to their perspective. The carefully neutral language suggested they recognized on some level that the power dynamic had fundamentally changed. After thoughtful consideration, I responded with equal neutrality, suggesting a video call the following Sunday. The conversation, when it occurred, was awkward, but civil. My mother looked noticeably older, with new lines around her, eyes in gray streaking her once dark hair. My father maintained his stoic expression, though the set of his shoulders suggested weariness beyond normal aging. They asked surface-level questions about my work, carefully avoiding any reference to our estrangement or their previous assertions. About my future prospects, I answered with professional courtesy, explaining the implementation methodology in accessible terms without minimizing its complexity or significance. Toward the end of the call, my father cleared his throat with familiar discomfort before speaking. "The company I work for has been acquired by Mid-American Manufacturing. They're consolidating operations and closing several facilities, including ours. I'll be unemployed by summer." The information wasn't delivered as a request for assistance or even sympathy, merely as context for their current circumstances, perhaps to explain why past positions had softened. My mother added that her health had stabilized with new treatment protocols, though insurance remained problematic with my father's employment uncertainty. I acknowledged their challenges with genuine concern, but maintained appropriate boundaries. This initial reconciliation attempt, if it could be called that, established neither emotional closure nor practical resolution. It simply opened a narrow channel of communication that might, with time and continued interaction, evolve toward meaningful connection. As spring transitioned to summer, my professional momentum accelerated dramatically. The Community Infrastructure Solutions Division secured major contracts with 3 state governments and a significant USAID partnership for international implementations. Our methodology was being adapted for graduate-level engineering courses at 5 universities, with more academic partnerships developing. My part-time graduate studies progressed steadily toward a specialized master's in integrated systems engineering, with my professional work accepted as practical credit for several course requirements. The student housing network continued expanding under professional management, serving over 1,000 students annually across 28 campuses. During this period of external success, I maintained monthly video calls with my parents, each conversation marginally less strained than the previous one. My father found temporary employment with reduced compensation while searching for a more stable position, a challenging prospect for a manufacturing specialist in his late 50s. During a period of industrial contraction in the region, in September, a pivotal opportunity emerged when the federal government announced a major infrastructure revitalization initiative focused on communities with deteriorating systems across multiple sectors. The program would allocate substantial funding for innovative approaches that offered cost-effective, sustainable solutions rather than simply replacing aging components with identical technology. This initiative aligned perfectly with our methodology, creating potential for nationwide implementation at unprecedented scale. WaterCorps immediately began preparing a comprehensive proposal encompassing water, energy, and communication systems, integration based on the community-calibrated framework. As our team developed the federal proposal, I received concerning news from Cameron. Our parents' financial situation had deteriorated significantly with the final closure of my father's workplace. Their home was now at risk of foreclosure. Medical bills had accumulated despite insurance, and their remaining savings could sustain them for perhaps 3 months without additional income. "They didn't ask me to tell you," Cameron clarified during our call. "They're still pretending everything's under control, but I thought you should know how bad it's actually gotten." This information arrived as I was directing the most significant professional opportunity of my career, one with potential to transform not just WaterCorps' market position, but the entire approach to infrastructure revitalization nationally. The timing created a complex emotional equation. My parents were facing the precise financial insecurity they had feared for me, while I was ascending to heights they had deemed impossible without the practical path they had demanded. After careful reflection, I decided against direct financial intervention. Such assistance would reinforce outdated relationship dynamics while potentially undermining the developing foundation for more authentic connection. Instead, I explored whether our federal infrastructure initiative might include Rochester's industrial region in its implementation scope. Initial analysis revealed that Rochester qualified under multiple criteria for the revitalization program: aging water systems, energy infrastructure vulnerabilities, and economic development constraints due to communications limitations. Including, the region in our proposal would be strategically sound regardless of personal connections. When our federal proposal was accepted for final consideration, I volunteered to lead the presentation team in Washington. The selection committee would determine which integrated infrastructure approach would receive initial funding for national implementation, a decision with billions in long-term implications for both government systems and the selected corporate partners. Our primary competition came from Consolidated Tech, a traditional infrastructure conglomerate with conventional approaches to system replacement. Their presentation emphasized technical specifications and standard implementation protocols, with cost efficiency achieved primarily through scale and standardization. Our presentation, by contrast, demonstrated how the community-calibrated framework could reduce total lifecycle costs by 37%, while improving operational reliability by 42% compared to conventional approaches. These metrics resulted not from technical superiority alone, but from fundamental alignment between system design and implementation reality. Following 2 days of intensive questioning from the selection committee, I received notification that WaterCorps' proposal had been selected for the initial implementation phase, covering 12 regions nationwide, including Rochester and surrounding communities in western New York. This success generated immediate corporate impact. WaterCorps' stock value increased 28% within a week of the announcement. The company authorized expansion of our division from 8 to 47 specialists, and Marcus promoted me to Executive Vice President of Community Infrastructure Solutions with expanded authority and compensation. More personally significant was the realization that my professional trajectory would now intersect directly with my hometown. The revitalization initiative would require establishing regional offices in implementation locations, with Rochester's office overseeing operations across western New York and parts of Pennsylvania. As planning for regional implementation began, I faced a decision about my involvement in the Rochester office establishment. Standard protocol would assign regional directors from our existing leadership team, with my role focusing on national coordination from Denver headquarters. However, this project's unique parameters and my familiarity with the region created compelling reasons for personal oversight of the initial implementation phase. After consultation with Marcus, I proposed a 3-month temporary relocation to Rochester to establish the regional office and implementation framework. This arrangement would serve organizational needs while providing structured context for potentially more substantive reconnection with my parents, whose changing circumstances had created openness to perspective shifts that previous stability had prevented. As I prepared for this strategic return to Rochester, I recognized that the professional imperative created perfect conditions for the personal reckoning that had been building since that rainy night with $157 and a duffel bag. WaterCore's transformative approach to community infrastructure had emerged directly from the insights developed through my independent journey, insights that would now bring me full circle to the community that had both shaped and rejected my vision. The approaching intersection would place me across from my parents not as their abandoned daughter seeking approval, but as an executive whose innovative methodology would revitalize the very community their conventional approach had failed to sustain. The scenario couldn't have been designed more perfectly to validate the decision I had made at 18, or to offer them opportunity for the growth that might finally bridge our divide. My return to Rochester in early October carried a profound symmetry. Nearly 10 years after leaving with minimal possessions and maximum determination, I arrived as an executive leading a transformative infrastructure initiative. The contrast wasn't lost on me as my corporate-arranged SUV passed familiar landmarks now viewed through a lens shaped by experience and achievement. The first 2 weeks focused entirely on professional establishment, securing office space in a revitalized downtown building, interviewing local engineering talent, and coordinating with municipal authorities across the implementation region. Our methodology required deep understanding of each community's specific constraints and capabilities, necessitating extensive meetings with local officials, utility managers, and community representatives. WaterCore's selection for the federal initiative had generated significant regional media coverage, with particular attention to the company's innovative approach and substantial job creation potential. Several articles mentioned my role and MIT background, but none connected me to Rochester beyond noting that our regional headquarters selection represented a commitment to communities with industrial manufacturing heritage. I maintained this professional separation deliberately, focusing on building the foundation for successful implementation before addressing personal history. The strategic importance of the Rochester office required uncompromised credibility with local partners and team members, unaffected by personal narratives regardless of their potential human interest value. 3 weeks into the establishment phase, our team had completed preliminary assessment of 17 community systems within the implementation region. The data confirmed significant infrastructure vulnerabilities: water distribution systems, averaging 47 years old, energy grids with critical reliability concerns during peak demand periods, and communications infrastructure insufficient for modern economic development requirements. With fundamental assessment completed, we scheduled presentation meetings with key stakeholders in each community to outline implementation approaches calibrated to their specific parameters. These presentations would introduce the community-calibrated framework to municipal leadership while establishing implementation timelines and resource requirements. Among the stakeholders invited to these preliminary meetings was Mid-American Manufacturing, the conglomerate that had acquired my father's former employer. As a major industrial presence with substantial infrastructure requirements, their participation was strategically valuable for comprehensive regional planning, regardless of any personal connection. The day before our first stakeholder presentation session, I received a text message from Cameron. "Dad knows about tomorrow's meeting. His supervisor asked him to attend as part of the facilities management team. He doesn't know you'll be there." This unexpected development created both professional and personal considerations. The meeting's primary purpose was introducing our implementation methodology to key regional partners, a critical first impression that would establish foundations for multi-year collaboration. Personal dynamics could potentially distract from this essential objective. After careful deliberation, I decided against preemptive contact with my father. The presentation format would provide structured interaction within a professional context, allowing recognition without immediate personal confrontation. This approach served both organizational interests and personal readiness, creating space for measured reconnection rather than emotional ambush. The stakeholder meeting convened in a downtown hotel conference room with approximately 30 representatives from municipal governments, utility providers, and major industrial users across the region. As the WaterCore team prepared presentation materials, I observed the attendees from a professional distance, identifying my father among the Mid-American representatives with a composure that belied my heightened awareness. He had aged visibly. Since our video calls, hair now predominantly gray, posture slightly stooped, expression more weathered. He wore a company polo shirt rather than the management attire that had once represented his professional identity, a visual confirmation of his reduced position within the organizational hierarchy. When our eyes briefly met during pre-meeting conversations, his expression registered shock, quickly masked by attempted professional neutrality. I opened the presentation with an overview of the Federal Infrastructure Initiative and WaterCore's implementation methodology, maintaining focused professionalism while being acutely aware of my father's gaze from the third row. As I explained, the community-calibrated framework, connecting its development to real-world implementation challenges I had observed across multiple environments, I recognized a profound irony. The approach generating my professional success had emerged directly from values my parents had instilled during my childhood, particularly resource efficiency and practical sustainability. During the technical demonstration portion, my team members took leading roles while I observed audience engagement. Most stakeholders showed increasing interest as they recognized how our methodology addressed long-standing frustrations with conventional infrastructure approaches. My father's expression remained unreadable, though his attention never wavered from the presentation. The session concluded with a structured Q&A period followed by informal networking. As conversations formed throughout the room, I maintained professional circulation among stakeholders, responding to technical inquiries and implementation questions with appropriate expertise. This pattern eventually brought me face-to-face with my father, who stood slightly apart from his colleagues as if anticipating this inevitable intersection. "The presentation was impressive, Ms. Winters," he said formally, using my professional identity rather than familial connection. His voice carried the carefully neutral tone of someone navigating an emotional minefield disguised as business conversation. "Thank you, Mr. Winters," I replied with matching professionalism. "Mid-American's participation is valuable for comprehensive implementation planning. Your facilities have specific infrastructure requirements that warrant dedicated assessment." This exchange established a workable approach, acknowledgement of our connection through mirrored formality while maintaining focus on legitimate professional objectives. We discussed Mid-American's particular challenges for several minutes, establishing a foundation for necessary ongoing communication without addressing the personal history that contextualizes it. As the meeting concluded, my father hesitated before departing. "Your mother would be interested in the community aspects of your methodology," he said, the statement simultaneously personal and professionally relevant. "These considerations align with concerns she's expressed about conventional infrastructure approaches in her work with the neighborhood association." This reference to my mother created an opening without emotional demand, an invitation to wider reconnection framed within professional parameters. I recognized both the gesture's significance and its carefully constructed deniability. "The community engagement phase begins next week," I responded, matching his balanced approach. "Neighborhood associations provide valuable perspective on implementation priorities and maintenance considerations. Her input would be welcome during that process." With this exchange, we established the possibility of family reconnection without undermining my professional position or requiring either party to directly address past conflicts. The approach respected both the legitimate organizational purposes that had brought us together and the complex personal history that required measured navigation. That evening, my father evidently shared the encounter with my mother. I received a message requesting a coffee meeting to discuss community infrastructure considerations from a neighborhood perspective. The transparent pretext maintained the same careful balance between professional interaction and personal reconnection, allowing both without requiring premature emotional resolution. We met at a small cafe near my temporary apartment, the location neither particularly significant nor completely neutral. My mother arrived alone, dressed with noticeable care that suggested the meeting's importance beyond its ostensible professional purpose. Our initial greeting carried awkward formality quickly softened by the familiar environment and genuine curiosity underlying our contrived agenda. "Your father described your presentation yesterday," she began after preliminary pleasantries. "The approach you've developed sounds remarkable, particularly the emphasis on aligning systems with community capabilities, rather than expecting communities to adapt to predetermined technological requirements." The methodology emerged from observing implementation failures across various environments, I explained, maintaining professional framing while acknowledging the personal journey that informed it. Technically, excellent systems repeatedly failed because they couldn't be sustainably maintained within local constraints. The solution required inverting traditional engineering priorities. My mother nodded with unexpected understanding. Like building a beautiful house without considering whether the occupants can afford to heat it or maintain the roof. The apparent solution creates long-term problems if it doesn't align with practical realities. Her analogy revealed genuine comprehension of my professional methodology that simultaneously referenced our personal history without directly confronting its painful elements. The approach created space for meaningful connection without requiring immediate resolution of past conflicts, a bridge constructed from mutual professional respect that might eventually support personal reconciliation. Our conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, gradually transitioning from infrastructure considerations to broader community development topics. My mother shared insights from her neighborhood association work that proved genuinely valuable for implementation planning, while I offered perspective on how residents could effectively advocate for consideration during the federal initiative. Near the conversation's conclusion, she addressed our personal history with characteristic indirection. "Your approach to these implementation challenges demonstrates remarkable maturity. Finding balance between technical possibility and practical sustainability requires wisdom typically developed through experience with both success and failure." The observation acknowledged my professional achievement while obliquely recognizing the journey that produced it. A journey they had opposed, but that had vindicated itself through measurable results. Without explicitly admitting their error, in judgment, she was acknowledging the legitimacy of the path I had chosen against their wishes. "Different perspectives offer valuable insights when they're considered honestly," I replied, addressing both infrastructure methodology and family reconciliation simultaneously. Integrating multiple viewpoints generally produces more sustainable solutions than adhering to predetermined assumptions regardless of changing circumstances. This measured exchange established parameters for continued connection without demanding immediate emotional resolution or explicit acknowledgement of past wrongs. The approach respected both parties' need for dignity while creating foundation for potential relationship reconstruction based on current realities rather than historical positions. The following week brought the next significant development in our reconnection process. The infrastructure initiative required identifying pilot implementation locations within each participating community, specific sites where our methodology would demonstrate measurable improvement through calibrated interventions across water, energy, and communication systems. Preliminary analysis highlighted a particular industrial zone in Rochester's Western District as an optimal demonstration site, combining aging infrastructure with strategic economic development potential. This zone included the Mid-American manufacturing facility where my father worked, creating legitimate organizational reasons for direct engagement with his specific knowledge of the facility's systems and requirements. Rather than delegating this assessment to team members, I scheduled the site visit personally, Recognizing that professional necessity had created another structured opportunity for measured reconnection, my father's position in facilities management placed him as the natural organizational contact for our technical evaluation team. When our water corps contingent arrived at the manufacturing facility, my father greeted us with professional courtesy, appropriate to visitors from a federal initiative partner. He had clearly prepared thoroughly, organizing comprehensive documentation of the facility's infrastructure systems, usage patterns, and maintenance challenges. This preparation demonstrated both professional competence and personal investment in the interaction's success, characteristics I recognized from childhood, but now viewed through mature perspective. The technical assessment proceeded with appropriate focus on the implementation methodology's application to specific facility conditions. My father's detailed knowledge of the systems provided valuable insights that would improve our calibration precision, while our team's innovative approach offered solutions to persistent problems that had frustrated conventional maintenance efforts. During a break in the assessment process, my father offered a facility tour that included areas beyond immediate infrastructure relevance. As we walked through manufacturing sections, he provided context about production processes, workforce considerations, and community impact that expanded my understanding of the facility's significance beyond technical parameters. In one particular, fabrication area, he paused beside a complex assembly system. "This station produces components for water distribution infrastructure," he explained, connecting the facility's output to our initiative's objectives. The valves and connection. Assemblies manufactured here are installed throughout the Northeast, including systems your team will likely be upgrading. This information carried professional relevance while establishing an unexpected connection. The infrastructure components I was working to revolutionize were physically manufactured by my father and his colleagues. Our supposedly separate professional worlds actually intersected in tangible ways neither of us had previously recognized. Quality manufacturing is essential for implementation success, I acknowledged, respecting both the professional reality and its personal significance. Innovative methodology requires reliable components designed for specific operational environments. This exchange represented another step in our measured reconnection. Mutual professional respect, creating foundation for potential personal reconciliation without demanding premature emotional resolution. We were constructing understanding through shared vocational purpose rather than directly confronting past conflicts, an approach that honored both parties' dignity while establishing common ground for potential relationship reconstruction. As the site assessment concluded, my father extended an unexpected invitation. "Your mother and I would like to discuss some relevant community considerations regarding the implementation timeline. Would you be available for dinner this evening? To continue these conversations in a more comprehensive setting?" The invitation maintained our established pattern, personal connection framed within professional relevance, allowing both without requiring explicit emotional engagement before appropriate foundations were established. The approach respected my professional position while creating space for family reconnection on measured terms. "That would be constructive," I replied, maintaining the same balanced framing. Community perspective significantly impacts implementation. Sequencing decisions. 7 o'clock would accommodate my remaining schedule today. With this exchange, we established the next phase of our careful reconnection process. A structured engagement that would bring me back to their home, not as the rejected daughter, but as the professional whose innovative methodology might revitalize both their community and our fundamental relationship. What awaited in that evening encounter would finally bridge the distance created nearly 10 years earlier, when I had walked away with $157 and a determination that had transformed not just my personal trajectory, but potentially their community's infrastructure future. Driving to my parents' house that evening felt surreal, a journey both familiar and foreign. The neighborhood had changed subtly over the past decade. Some houses renovated while others showed signs of economic strain mirroring the region's industrial decline. Their home, once the embodiment of suburban stability, now displayed visible maintenance deferrals. Peeling trim paint, cracked concrete steps, garden beds overtaken by practical vegetables rather than the ornamental plants my mother had once prioritized. I parked at the curb rather than in the driveway, an unconscious choice that maintained symbolic distance while accepting the invitation. The walk to the front door retraced steps I had taken thousands of times, yet with entirely different context. Approaching, not as dependent daughter, but as independent professional whose path had vindicated itself through measurable achievement. My mother answered the door with carefully composed warmth, dressed in what I recognized as her special occasion attire. Though visibly worn from years of use, the home's interior revealed similar signs of financial constraint. Familiar furniture now threadbare in spots, walls needing paint, the dining room table set with their wedding china that had always been reserved for significant moments. "We thought this conversation warranted proper dinner service," my mother explained, noting my observation of the formal table setting. The statement acknowledged both the professional importance of our infrastructure discussions and the personal significance of this carefully structured reunion. My father emerged from the kitchen carrying a casserole dish, one of the few culinary preparations in his limited repertoire. "I hope vegetable lasagna remains acceptable," he said, his tone balancing between hospitality and uncertainty about my current preferences. "We remembered you enjoyed it, though tastes change over time." "Vegetable lasagna is perfect," I assured him, appreciating both the effort and the implicit acknowledgement that they recognized the years between us had transformed more than just professional circumstances. They were trying, in their limited way, to accommodate the person I had become, rather than expecting conformity to who I had been. The initial dinner conversation maintained our established pattern: infrastructure considerations, providing legitimate professional framework for personal reconnection without demanding premature emotional engagement. We discussed community implementation priorities, maintenance capacity challenges, and potential economic development impacts from the federal initiative. As the meal progressed, my mother gradually introduced more personal elements, asking measured questions about my life in Denver, professional responsibilities at WaterCorps, and graduate studies progression. Her inquiries remained carefully bounded, avoiding direct references to our estrangement or their opposition to my educational choices. After dinner, over coffee served in the formal cups reserved for significant visitors, my father finally addressed the underlying tension with characteristic directness. "We've been following your career trajectory since learning about your position at WaterCorps," he acknowledged. "Your accomplishments are substantial, more significant than we anticipated, possible through the path you chose." The statement wasn't quite an apology or admission of error, but it represented meaningful acknowledgement that their assessment of my potential had been fundamentally mistaken. Coming from my father, whose identity had been substantially constructed around predictive judgment and practical wisdom, this recognition carried significant weight. "The methodology I've developed builds on principles I observed throughout childhood," I replied, offering reciprocal acknowledgement of their positive influence despite our conflict. Resource efficiency, practical sustainability, and adaptation to constraints were values demonstrated in this household, even if we disagreed about their application to my education. This exchange established important parameters for potential reconciliation: mutual recognition of both the conflict's reality and the legitimate values each party had attempted to honor through their respective positions. We were acknowledging substantive disagreement while identifying underlying shared principles that might support relationship reconstruction. My mother added perspective that revealed their evolving understanding. "We were operating from experiences that proved unreliable predictors," she said carefully. "Your father's career stability seemed assured through conventional employment with established companies. My administrative position appeared secure through compliance with traditional expectations. Both assumptions proved fundamentally mistaken." This acknowledgement represented significant development in their perspective, recognition that the security they had prioritized over my educational aspirations had ultimately proven illusory, while the risk they had feared had produced substantial rewards. The statement didn't explicitly validate my decision, but acknowledged the flawed premises underlying their opposition. Different paths involve different risks and opportunities, I observed, neither demanding vindication nor dismissing their concerns. Engineering teaches that optimal solutions depend on specific parameters rather than universal principles. What functions effectively in one context may fail completely in another. This framing invited recognition of legitimate perspective differences without requiring either submission or dominance. We were establishing foundation for potential relationship based on mutual respect for autonomous judgment rather than hierarchical, authority or dependent compliance. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.